obligatory shot of Bane holding Batman over his head, and obligatory shot of Bane breaking Batman's back over his knee. With that out of the way, on to the review. Welcome to 5 Points of Articulation, where I review action figures and then articulate 5 points to help you decide if you want to add that figure to your collection. The 5 points I discuss are packaging, presentation, posability, playability, and price. I'm Jason, and if you enjoy my content, please like, share, subscribe, do all the YouTube rigmarole. Today we're taking a titanic look at the DC Multiverse Bane Megafig. Starting off with the packaging, and Bane comes in a big giant Megafig window box. Kinda looks like he's floating in a swimming pool, or a big sea of emptiness. Name and logo down here, name on the side. I love how it's just Bane. It's not like DC Rebirth Bane or anything like that, just Bane. You know who I am. I am Gotham's Reckoning. For those who want it, here's the barcode. Notice that this is now Megafig Wave 3. Clayface and Man-Bat were part of Wave 2. This is going to be important as we discuss price. And then on the back we have a stunning piece of Bane art. But it's me, so of course I have a complaint. Early DC Multiverse also had art on the back, but they also included the source of where that artwork came from. As DC Multiverse returns to comic book art, I also hope that they bring that back. I see something like this and I want to know where it came from so I can go check it out. If nothing else, so I can go and support that artist. Of course, the real focus is the work of art inside the box, and for packaging, Bane gets 1 whole point. Moving on to presentation, and the top of his head, Bane stands at 9 inches, but to the top of his hose, he stands at 9.5. Nobody has more hose than Bane! First impressions, and wow. I'm suddenly very okay with the fact that I never finished the Last Night on Earth version. From the top, and we have his famous Luchador mask. Luchador? Nice leather texture on there. Some of the paint around the edge is a bit iffy, but that's alright. And speaking of paint, there's a nice wash in there to bring out all the craggy details of his skin. It's a little thing McFarlane didn't have to do that I very much appreciate. Also a little bit of slop over here. One thing that does diverge a bit from the Knightfall design is this harness. That's to accommodate his tankard of Venom, not to be confused with, Venom. The tubes for that are nice and neon. And of course it goes down his arm to his little control box. And by control box I just mean a big red button. I love the texture and all the chips and dings in this gauntlet. There's some nice detailing on his fingerless gloves. You can see where there should be some flesh tone in there. Moving over to the other hand, and it's actually one of the only other things about this figure I don't like. Not that the hands are open, though we will be talking about that during playability. It's that the glove is actually smaller than the wrist, so it kind of looks like his flesh is growing over it. Either that, or he's really retaining water and should probably talk to his doctor. Getting back to the harness, I just want to take a moment to talk about what a great job they did. It's hard to see because of the shadows, but there's actually a gap between the buckles, and all the buckles have been really nicely painted. There's also some great detail on all the different straps and pouches. Really good texture on the shirt too. Flipping it around and we can see that texture a bit easier. Interestingly enough, while the front is a solid plastic, the back isn't, and he's actually very, very squishy. Moving on down, this is a very quintessential Bane belt, and just like the rest of the figure, there's some fantastic detailing on the pants. In addition to the great texturing, there's some very practical pockets. I assume these are supposed to be knee pads, and more great detailing on the boots. You can see the treads from the sides, but there aren't any underneath. At the very least though, he does have peg holes. Interesting choice here we'll be talking about in the next category, and for those who are interested, here he is from the back. This is the Bane we have been waiting for. Do I have some minor quibbles? Sure, but that's every figure, and those quibbles are nothing compared to how awesomely sculpted and painted this figure is. For presentation, I'm giving this Bane 1 whole point. Moving on to posability, and there are a couple of very surprising choices that have been made here. One thing that should come as no surprise is that Bane's head's in a dumbbell joint. Not surprisingly, he can't really look up, but the important thing is he can look all the way down. Pretty decent tilt, and side to side. Moving on down, and Bane has swivel hinge shoulders that raise up 90 degrees. No rotator cuff, and no forward and back. Also, no bicep swivel. He does, however, have single jointed swivel elbows, and the swivel in the elbow mostly makes up for the lack of bicep. The first really interesting choice is that instead of a ball joint, he has a swivel hinge wrist. It can hinge up this much, and down this much. It's also cut fairly close to the wrist so it doesn't get in the way of the palm, and then shifting to the torso, and all Bane has is a dumbbell waist. He can't really arch back or hunch forward in any meaningful way. He can tilt a bit, but he also doesn't really hold it, but at the very least, he can twist side to side. Below the waist, and Bane has the typical McFarlane hips. They can kick forward 90 degrees, and do a perfect split. To be honest, I'm pretty impressed. Zooming on in, skin, and he has a great twist at the hip, very crunchy double jointed knees, toe ticulation, and Marvel Legends style ankles that hinge and pivot. This is a very interesting choice, and let me explain why. The typical DC Multiverse figure has an ankle ball that can swivel, hinge, and pivot, and for a standard DC Multiverse figure, that's fine. In my experience, however, these Megafigs have a real problem with falling over, and it's usually because the ankle simply isn't strong enough. This more traditional hinge is going to do a great job of supporting Bane's weight. It was a very clever decision, and I applaud it. Still, I do have one minor note for McFarlane toys to consider in the future. In general, Marvel Legends ankles are my absolute favorite. They simply cut a better silhouette and look a lot more natural. Most of the time, however, all they can do is hinge and pivot, but that's okay because, again, most of the time they also have boot cut. I don't know if you've noticed, but I've never complained about a DC Multiverse figure not having boot cut because the swivel in the ankle ball makes up for it. I'm completely content with an ankle like this, but for future figures I would recommend considering a boot cut. This way you'll have a sturdier ankle without compromising the articulation we're accustomed to. While it's consistent with the kind of posability we've come to expect from a Megafig, articulation is not really this figure's strong suit. While I appreciate the experimentation with the ankles, the limited range in the wrists and especially the torso really hold Bane back. For posability, I'm giving Bane half a point. Moving on to playability, and Bane comes with a trading card and a figure stand. Pause here if you want to read it. The larger conversation surrounding this figure, however, is what he doesn't come with. Specifically, that he doesn't come with fists. I can only assume that it was a budget issue, and budget issues are a conversation for price. But playability is more than accessories, it's also about how well your figure plays with others. For all the other Banes in my toy box, and here we have Batman, the animated series by Kenner. Here we have the Bane from the Batman and Robin movie that looks nothing like the Bane from the Batman and Robin movie, and honestly looks so comic book-like that that's where I used it in my collection as a kid. Here we have Legends of the Dark Knight, also by Kenner, and then we have this one by Mattel. This body mold was first released as part of the 2003 Batman series, but was then reused twice for DC superheroes. First, some members of the Bat family, and here we have Mattel and Multiverse versions of Damian, Mattel and Multiverse versions of Tim, DC Designer Series and DC Essentials versions of Nightwing, DC Essentials and DC Multiverse versions of Batgirl, and DC Essentials and DC Multiverse versions of Red Hood. I finally found one. For some Batman comparisons, and starting off with the blue and gray, here we have DC Universe Classics by Mattel. Here we have one from DC Direct. The body mold was originally used for the Killing Joke, but this one is for the Secret Files Hugo Strange. Very appropriately, here we have the Knightfall Batman from DC Essentials. And then moving over to DC Multiverse Batmans, and here we have Detective Comics 1000. Here we have the Bow Damage Greg Capullo version. That's pretty appropriate. The ever popular Three Jokers version. The less popular, but I like it, Rebirth Batman Year 2. This is the closest thing we have so far to a Knightfall style Batman from McFarlane. Page Puncher's Batman, and my own custom version of Batman from Hush. For some other Batman villains, and here we have the Arkham Origins Deathstroke, Arkham Knight Scarecrow, DC Direct Killer Croc. I do have a review of the new one coming. DC Direct Poison Ivy, the DC Designer Series Greg Capullo Catwoman, the DC Designer Series Greg Capullo Riddler, Arkham City 2-Pack Two-Face by Mattel. Boy, I wish McFarlane was making a new version of this. The 2-Pack version of Hush, DC Essentials Harley Quinn, the Joker from Mortal Kombat 11, and my own custom Kit Bash. For some other large-scale DC Multiverse figures, and here we have King Shark, here we have Clayface, and here we have Man-Bat. For some 7-inch scale heavy hitters from the House of Ideas, here we have the Hulk, here we have Rhino, the Juggernaut, and here we have Venom. These two characters were of course played on screen by Tom Hardy. For a relative scale comparison, here's Bane with Pizza Spidey and the Spectacular Spider-Man, and as always, here he is with Stealth Iron Man. As good as this figure looks, am I seriously gonna dock it points just because it doesn't come with some alternate fists? Yep. For playability, I'm giving Bane half a point. This leaves us with nothing left to discuss but the price. Seeing as how he's a Megafig, Bane retails for $39.99. This is the part where I remind you that he is part of Wave 3. In toy manufacture, the budget for a wave is not broken up evenly. Some figures get more money and others less based on what that particular figure needs, but it all balances out. This is why some figures in a wave get cheaped out on, while others get more.
Oh, you think your knowledge of toy factories is your ally. I was born in a toy factory. molded by it. No, really, I was made in a steel mold.
Long story short, the reason some Megafigs feel less worth it than others is because they get less money to accommodate the larger, more involved characters. That said, does Bane feel like he's worth $40? Maybe not, but compared to higher-end figures like the Storm Collectibles Injustice 2 or the aftermarket on the Mattel Collect & Connect, $40 is a great way to add Bane to your collection without breaking the bank. For price, I'm giving Bane 1 whole point for a grand total of 4 out of 5. For more Batman-related Megafigs, check out this video on Man-Bat or this video on Clayface. Who do you hope gets the Megafig treatment next? Sound off in the comments below. Thank you so much for watching. I'll be back again real soon, but until then, play nice and have fun.